This has been one of the more, dare I say, provocative and enjoyable series for me personally, because we are stepping out on a limb and naming things, dare I say, canonizing, albeit for a short period of time, because I'm sure it'll shift. But for that, all that to say, we're kind of canonizing and saying, these are 8 elements to the progressive conversation that we are taking bullets for right now. That we feel like we need to give some sort of foundation to how we are coming to this connection with God, how we are navigating the scriptures and the story of the Bible, how we are dealing with community and relationships, what it means to move forward. Because if we are not at least working at bumping into the divine and doing it together, like I said earlier, it feels like then we're kind of just missing out on really what we are to be together. And so in these last few weeks, we talked a few weeks ago about the whole idea of liberation. And what does it mean for free people to free people? That when I wake up to who I am, like Matt was talking about a little bit is in terms of the awareness conversation. A couple weeks ago we talked about the evolution kind of conversation, the evolving narrative. And this is something that is, I think, really happening beautifully in so many of your lives. I get to watch it in kind of this front row perspective that you come to faith, you come to all the things that you are, and you're beginning to realize that you're, again, I know it's a dirty word in the Christian tradition, but this idea of evolving, like you're shifting, you're stretching, you're expanding, you're becoming something that you weren't a year ago, 5 years ago, that you're moving into being somebody that is more transformed and more marked. And that worldview is beginning to inform you in terms of how you see your progressive journey. So there's liberation, evolution, and then last week Matt talked about awareness, and he gave this beautiful sort of journey that we are on when we are marked by a change, when something happens, when we lose hope, when the person we've loved for our longest of time is gone, or when the church that we've been a part of has somehow pushed us out. When something happens, something resets how we see life, and we encounter a change. And then in that change, there's suffering. There's a death of how we once saw something. That happens all the time in our lives, whether it be professionally or personally or relationally. And then on the other side of that suffering and death, we have these epiphanies. We have this new awareness, this new way, this new lens in which we see life. And it allows us to enter into a new space called maturity, a new life. This is where we then sit with all that stuff that's informing our current context. And this cycle of life is something that we are always in. Possibly you are in 2 or 3 of them simultaneously. That's very difficult to do. But maybe you're in a couple at the same time. Maybe you're in this in your professional space. Maybe you're in this in your family space. I talked to a dear, sweet sister of mine who's worked so hard to make her marriage happen, and it is just falling apart, and her heart is broken. And I talked to her on this cycle, and she's living it right now. She's living with suffering and death, but she's waking up to a new identity as to who she is, to what it means for this tribe to come around her, what it means for her to connect with God, what it means to be a single parent in that space. And you can see this massive brokenness, but there's a little bit of a hope component because she's coming into a new life. She knows it's not going to be easy, but she's waking up to some newness of who she is. So when we look at the planes of a progressive faith, when we look at the generosity, or the journey, that we are on as a community, there are these 8 areas, and probably today's piece is maybe the hardest for me to talk about, because I think often many of you come to this conversation of what I'm going to talk about today. There's baggage with it. There's all these assumptions that we in the church are navigating. And for some of us in this space, we identify with the post-church narrative. Like I was post-evangelical or post-Catholic, but now I'm finding energy in something else. And then others of you met somebody this past week said, Scott, I don't have those post-issues. I was never in the church before, and then I'm here to say, well, then you're ahead of the curve. Because probably you're not as marked or as tainted. And so you can sit in this space, maybe a sense of like putty and vulnerability, and it's like, what's next? So as you sit in this space, as we navigate the spiritual journey down the road, I look back on my tradition. I look back on the 40 years or 50 years, almost 50 years I've been involved in the church, And there's a couple things that specifically I am so insanely grateful for, and today's talk is one of those. That the church early on instilled this principle, this practice in my life that has forever marked me, and is something it's never easy, but it's something my wife and I and my family, we've continued to let it be a part of our spiritual practice and our spiritual journey. My parents did this, they still do this, it's something that I've been able to watch over the years, and it is one of those things that is possibly the only one of the 8 that we're talking about over the next 8 weeks, these 8-week series, that is measurable, that is defined, that there's a sense of, yes, I'm in, no, I'm not in. And this is something that all of us have to contend with, and it's something that I imagine all of us struggle with at one level, and it's the conversation of generosity. If you're new with us today, I'm going to invite you to sit and just be in the space. If you've been around here, you need to know that at the end of this talk today, there's not going to be a commitment card for you to fill out. I'm not going there. What I want to do today is, can we ask some questions? Can we take the grid from where we've come from and where we're finding ourselves these days in maybe an evolving and in a progressing space, and say, what does generosity mean? What does it mean in terms of my money and my resources, and how do I now see those resources through the different grids and the different filters with which we are now playing, with which we are now experimenting? That's how I want to go after this morning. I'm not trying to guilt you into anything. As a matter of fact, if I can slow it down for a second, if I look back before the changes that I've experienced in my own life in terms of money, for me personally, my previous narrative in terms of generosity was rooted in 2 fundamental components, fear and guilt. It was how we were moved in the church to give to the church. And let me also clarify today, this is not a conversation about generosity exclusively towards Watershed or the church specifically. Obviously, this I would think would be a part of where you want to extend generosity, but this is a fundamental principle in terms of who you are internally, in terms of what generosity looks like for you and I. And for most of my life, the engine that drove, that compelled, that pushed me forward was a sense of fear, was a sense of guilt. And so this morning, what I want to do is I want to take Matt's grid of last week, and I want to take us a little bit on this journey in terms of what change, suffering, awareness, and maturity looks like in the generosity narrative. So if fear and guilt are no longer what drives me in terms of generosity, then what is it that compels me to be generous? Well, at the very early stages, this journey began for me was this conversation that, again, in my previous context, it was about me changing the world out there, as opposed to now I feel like it's about me changing internally what's going on. So before I can really be generous out there, I have to make an internal shift that in the past context, I might have been guilted or sucked into, well, this is a larger church, this is a larger expression, this is a larger outreach opportunity, this is the nonprofit, you need to give to that thing, and you just give from a sense of fear or guilt. Now, it's more informed from an internal wiring, and then from there, I give outward. That my generosity is not something that is sort of sucked out of me, it's something that comes from within, going outward, a different disposition than I ever had before. And that was a shift, that was a change that I had to make, that my wife and I, we had to make together. This one is probably the most significant, because I don't give from a sense of fear and guilt. I give from a sense of love and gratitude. That when I write a check to this church, I do so because I truly love who you guys are. I love what we're becoming, warts and all. I love the conversations that we get to have, the justice we get to experience. I love the blocks that are happening throughout our city, and people asking really good questions, and marriages being restored in those blocks, and friendships being found, and faith with God and in God changing and transforming, and people having a sense of a new-founded hope, and the justice initiatives that we get to pull off locally and internationally. And when I contribute, my wife and I contribute to this space, there's a sense of gratitude. It wasn't always like that for me. That's a new awakening. For some of you, you're wired that way. I talked to a lady earlier. It's like, man, I don't know any other way to give from a sense of gratitude. I said, well, yours way more evolved than the rest of us around here. But that's, for some of you, it comes from, you only know how to be generous from that space. And then kind of the guilt-free space, that I can't be driven by guilt to give. So that's been kind of a new awakening. But here's what's happened for me in this. In these sort of shifts in terms of how I see generosity, I've experienced loss. I've experienced some suffering, albeit first world suffering problems. But for me, for the longest time, my generosity equaled God's protection in my life. that it was almost like mafia money. Here's a few bucks, God, now you got my back, right? Now, the church never said it that way, but alluded to it pretty intensively in terms of if you want God's blessing on your life, then you're faithful in a whole bunch of things, in the whole list of things. If you want God's curse on your life, then be unfaithful in some of these spaces, and that will happen. But what I'm coming into is this awareness that I don't think God works that way. So if he doesn't work that way, then the loss for me in that space is when I go through fear, when I have needs, in the past, the automatic assumption was God's going to take care of those needs. As long as I'm faithful, as long as I can, and I'm paying the bill, so clearly God's, I'm being faithful, God. But what happens when things go south and you're still being generous? What happens when you lose that job and you're still being generous? Or years ago, I made an investment that cost me dearly. And I thought we were the potential of losing everything. And I'm thinking, well, but God, I give to you. Like, how could this go south? Because I'm supposedly, doing the kind of the proverbial slot machine. I'm giving you, God, all what you want. I'm putting in there. And so in doing so, clearly you're to take care of my needs. And when it didn't work out like I thought it should have worked out, massive fear, massive angst, that maybe God was not a God that was going to fix my needs because somehow I was being generous. And in letting that go, a little bit of a security blanket has had to leave my thinking, my worldview. But the other side of that is I begin to come into a different kind of understanding and awareness of God. That what I've come to realize is that generosity chips away at greed. I got a ton of greed I got to navigate. It's just something that I'm wired, man, that way. The greed for me is not about owning things, because stuff to me is actually a nuisance. I got to maintain it. It's expensive. It takes my time. I'm fundamentally a minimalist, not in my house because my wife's not, but I like the idea of minimalism. But for me, greed comes from a place of hoarding resources so that when something goes south, I'm safe. So when I give away, it's as though I'm having to kind of put my trust and faith in that, like, all right, God, we're in this together. Things can go south, but you're forcing me to see the resources that I have as something that I need to give away because it charges me, it challenges me, it reminds me that these are not my own. And if I can back it down here a second, for me to even sit here and say, well, I have resources to give and hold back and give, I am a white male, privileged, grown up in the U.S. with degrees and resources, not because I've worked hard for them, in part maybe, but because I've had the privilege and the luxury of those handed to me. And so the audacity with which ever I somehow allude to the idea that I am being generous with everything that I have earned is so jacked up. And what it does is it reminds me that what I have is only, or at least largely, because of the location and proximity with which I was literally born. And when I come to that space, I can begin to realize that, okay, I have to release this. This is not mine to fully control. Now, it's mine to steward well. It's mine to harness well. It's mine to be strategic with. But it's the greatest sort of awareness that I'm having these days, that how dare I hold this as though somehow it's a privilege that somebody could receive my resources when fundamentally I need to be releasing those and letting them go because they're not mine anyways. That for many of us, and myself included, that this awareness and epiphany space is that my generosity is planned and intentional. It is rarely on a whim. Rarely am I moved to being generous. Now, we are sometimes, my wife and I, but rarely. It's very intentional for us, that I have to be intentional with my generosity, or if I give when I feel like I should give, or when I give when I feel like I'm compelled towards something, then it probably won't happen as frequently, and I won't be as disciplined in being generous so that I can keep the greed quotient at bay. Do you see the difference in this? That the waking up to this is regularity, consistency, predictability. That if I am going to somehow be evolved, if I have the audacity to make that assumption, or progressive, or moving forward in my spiritual journey, then I need to be intentional with it, that I need to be disciplined with it, that I can systematically chip away at greed by how I systematically and intentionally give. And this is an inside-out process for me. I'm grateful that you are allowing me to share this morning because it's kind of my story. And please know, I have not arrived in this. I don't somehow think I'm better than anybody else in this. This has just been part of the journey that my wife and I have been on. I know for many of you it's similar for you. And here's another one of these awarenesses that I'm kind of coming into. That the more we evolve, the more we are to be generous. And for some of us, we come out of these church environments that generosity and giving was part of the DNA of those spaces, and it marked you and it informed you, and you were so good at being giving away in your time and your resources. And then you sort of move into a new theological disposition, a more progressive space, supposedly, and you're like, well, I don't give the same way because I don't give from fear or guilt. So I'm here to say, what if you give from a space that actually is more evolved than fear or guilt? That you're compelled, that you're intentional, that you understand how you fit in the global space, and that you are a piece in that cog that is allowing the system to move forward because of you being generosity, because you are learning to keep greed at bay. So the more we evolve, the more generous we become. And then we kind of move into this next space. As those awarenesses and those epiphanies sort of happen for me, the way in which I now get to live in this new life, in the day-to-day, in the 9 to 5, in the sort of monotony of the day-to-day routine. What I'm reminded to do is staying the course in my generosity, staying true to it, that I'm committed to it, that it's not something that if it works or doesn't work. I mean, I know we go through different seasons in life, and I get that. I really do get that. I generally get that. I had a person come to me recently, that's been several years ago, and they said, we need to get a third vehicle for, I'm not sure exactly why, because I didn't have that many people in their house. We need to get a third vehicle, and because of that, we're not going to be able to continue to give to this community. And what it said was, like, me having the fancier car is more important than what's going on in this space. And there's probably a deeper story in all that. But now the generosity piece was gone, and they're missing out on what it means to live in that space of commitment. That less is not an option. This is hard. It gets... My kids are so freaking expensive. I got a 14-year-old and 11-year-old that eat like animals. I literally say, like, you can get the bacon, Colson, or you can get a drink. What do you want? You can't have both. And he looks at me like, this is crazy. I said, son, you're just too expensive. No, you can't have it all, you know. And what I'm come to realize is, like, life is expensive, and it happens to you. And I know those are real realities. But for us to look at how we progress and we hoard more, that can't be the solution. That can't be what works at the interior of us. And again, I am not here to say, you need to give more to Watershed. Watershed needs to be your only outlet. I am here to say that part of what allows us to exist well is that generosity happens here. But this is a core learning that many of us, myself included, need to hear if we claim any sense of progressive conversation. You need to stay strategic. It makes sense that you would give to a space, that you would give to people, you would give to organizations that are doing something with the resources. I would think would be something motivational to you, that you want to give to that, and because they're making it happen. And so I think it's important that you stay strategic, but you stay flexible. If it was left up to my wife, we would be broke. Not because she likes to spend a lot of money, although she does like to do that, she would give it all away. She's on Facebook like, oh, look at this need. We got to give to it. Oh, look at this need. We got to give to it. And often we do. And often we do need to give away to it. And people like me with the greed problem, it's hard to do that. And then I have somebody like my wife who's constantly saying, but here's an opportunity and here's a circumstance. And while there's a sense of intentionality, there is white space to say, you know what, this is a sister or brother of ours, and they have a need, and we might be able to do something. So yeah, let's move forward. So while you're intentional, there's got time to be flexible. Again, I think you need to ask the ROI question. Is there a return on the investment? Is when I give, is there somebody that's being impacted? Is the world a better place? Is transformation happening? Those are important questions. And then there's this last piece here. And this is a new sort of container for me that I never contended with until probably the last 6 or 8 months. In one sense, I'm kind of coming full circle with this, and I call it universal response. Here's what I mean by this. I'm going to jump into the quantum physics space real quick because I think it attempts to get at the larger conversation, what's going on. So, what I'm learning as a want-to-be scientist, of which I'm not that smart, so I get quantum physics for dummies books. What I understand is the quantum physics level, subatomic, below atom, smaller. There's a whole bunch of unpredictable stuff, soup, happening in that space. Things are moving, quarks and subatomic atoms and all these nuances are moving, and they're in response to each other differently, and they're in response to the person who's actually observing those differently, depending on who the person is. So very little consistency there. If I bring you to the table and you look at it, then they respond differently to you. There's this idea that there's all this energy moving down here, and it's not orderly. Like something is making all that happen, and it's not orderly. I think that is the most beautiful defense, if I need to give one, that there is a God out there, that there's a consciousness moving at the subatomic space. That's another conversation for another day. And so all this stuff is moving down here, and what scientists have found out, and it's called the butterfly effect. It's been around for the last 15, 20 years in terms of we've known this, that when something is changed down here over in this space at a subatomic level in LA, that there actually is something in a response over here in the Northeast that is counter to that response there and going the opposite way, and it's somehow connected and married, and we don't know how or we don't know why. And so we know at a subatomic level that the universe is changed by a reaction creates another kind of reaction. So wouldn't it make sense that if you give to me from a space of generosity, you write a check and it's sacrificial and it's hard and it's getting at the greed stuff and it's forming you and it's marking you, and you believe in what I'm doing and you give that towards me or I give that towards you, and we receive that and we take that in, isn't it possible that actually there's stuff happening that we don't know that's happening because you're being generous and I'm being generous? Is it possible that maybe when you're generous, something responds to that? That the universe is different because of your generosity, that possibly you might actually see a sense of a return on that generosity. And I'm talking on both sides of my mouth here. But there's a different disposition that informs that. That I'm not trying to give to God out of guilt so that I can get something back in return, but I give, and by the way, I have found in my own journey that out of my generosity, I have received, within just a few days of me being generous, something actually more consequential than what I even gave out. I don't know why that's happened. I can't articulate that. Do I think God's possibly involved in that? I like that. I think so. Is it possible that we are going to receive because we give? I think so. Is that what drives us? No. Is that what compels us? No. We are driven to say there are people out there that have need, and we happen to be the holders of resource, and so we distribute. And then there's others out there that are saying, if I can receive that from you, that somehow there's going to be some way in which we receive something back in return. And I call it universal response because I think that the universe is responding to you and I don't know why it happens, and I don't think we can put a science to it. I don't think we can sort of say it's the proverbial slot machine. We put the quarter in and somehow God's going to bless us. Yet simultaneously, in my own life, and I know it's your story for some of you because I've heard you talk about it, there's something about when you are being freed of holding your resources that there's something you receive back sometimes, and it just is. Are they correlated? I don't know, but it sure feels like it often. And so I look at this conversation today, and I have to admit, in the first service, Taryn was here, my wife, and I was sitting next to her before I came up, and I said, I'm really nervous about this morning because I hate talking about money with you guys. It's sort of like talking to your kids about the birds and the bees. It's like, Dad, do you let us? But it's one of those things that in terms of this progressive conversation, it's the one really measured practice and discipline. It's the one thing that really marks us. It's the one thing that allows you to have the sense that we're doing this together. And so here's what I want to do. In this series, we've been trying to elicit your feedback, your thoughts. The first service was, the feedback was excellent, and then the conversation afterwards was so awesome. So can I ask you two questions? First question I want to ask you is, when you've been generous, what motivated you? Or when I've been generous, what motivated me? And what demotivates you from being generous? Like these two questions, I am gently interested in because I get to work with people who are compelled to be generous and who are often demotivated by generosity. And I'm asking these questions not so much just from the standpoint of Watershed, although feel free to answer in the context of this community. But I'm wanting to know what motivates you and what demotivates you in terms of generosity. And would you take a few minutes, I'm going to keep this on the screen, would you take a few minutes and turn to a person next to you and take like 2 or 3 minutes and answer or address this question with the person next to you. And I know you probably don't even know them, and if you're new today, you're like, oh, this is awkward. I know, but I want you to know you are being heard this morning. So take 2 or 3 minutes, turn to each other, and then we'll kind of go from there. I've got Austin and Thomas up here willing to help us out, and I would love to hear some of what you guys just talked with each other about. Who would be willing to kind of be the first person or two that says, when I've been generous, this is what's motivated me, and be willing to share that? If you would be willing to share that, raise your hand. We'll come to you with a mic. Give us your name and give us like 20 seconds of response.
All right, my name's Donovan. This is my wife, Angela. First-time visitor, so.
5,000 people on social media are hearing you right now. Awesome.
First question, what motivated us? And I think my wife and I, she said it before I did. It's all about the impact. Seeing the fruit of what you're giving towards, seeing what happens when you give. I think for us, that is the biggest thing ever, to see lives changed based on us being generous. Because it's not our resources anyway, it's what God gives us. We're like conduits to the blessings of other people. And so when you see the real impact of what God can do through us,
that's good. That's
the motivation.
Good.
So, am I answering the second question or just the first one?
You can answer the second one. You're new here today, so you get a pass.
The motivating factor, I'll just say for me, because I don't think my wife is ever not motivated to give, because she does it so much. And so for me, it's the poverty mindset. It's always that voice in the back of my mind that says, we may not have enough if we do this. And for her, she's like, yes, God's telling me $1,000, and that's what we're doing. What's God telling you? And I say, God's telling me we need to eat tomorrow. That's what he's telling me.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's always the struggle. I have 4 kids, I have a wife, and I'm always thinking about how I'm going to take care of you guys. And so sometimes that is a demotivator for me.
Awesome. Make sure you guys love on these two. They're brand new with us today. Awesome. Thank you. All right, who else?
Hey, I'm Paul. I'm gonna go backwards. So I'll go the demotivating factor. Typically for me comes from fear and a scarcity mindset. Being generous typically is motivated from being less self-protective and the outpouring of love that comes from that. And when I'm not protecting myself, then I feel like I can give freely.
That's good, Paul. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
I really believe in my heart everything I am ever hope to be is to give from God. And so to give's absolutely nothing. It's absolutely nothing. It's an opportunity that it's been granted for me to even be here and be able to give back in any kind of way. What demotivates me, and I do struggle with this a little bit, is the cause worthy? And I like that word that you use, assumed. Is it worthy? Does it incorporate what God wants me to do in my life? And I do struggle with this. So thank you, Scott, for the message today.
Oh, thank you. I hear each of you say, I feel like you're speaking from that evolved space. I'm so challenged by it because fear and guilt drove me for so long, and hear so many of you speak from the space of, I'm grateful. I have, to whom much is given, much is required kind of a narrative. I have a lot because I've been given so much. How can I not be generous from that space? And so thank you for that. It's such an evolved community. How dare I lead you? All right. A couple more.
Hi. For me, what motivates me is I have had people just generally love on me, like throughout the story of my life, have been in places of vulnerability, places of suffering, places of pain, and have experienced the blessing that others have been in my life, in my family's life, in the life of my mom and my brother, and remembering those places where people have loved on me and have helped me has made me be in a place where I want to be that blessing unto other people. So that's in general what motivates me. And then I guess what demotivates me, again, is that that fear of, and maybe even just self-protectionism. I'm a mom, so I'm a mama bear. Like, I want to protect my little circle of the world, and I don't want anything to happen to them, and so I want to provide for them and protect them as much as I possibly can.
Yes.
And so there is that hoarding sense
Yeah. No,
that's very
good.
real, out of my love for my children,
Yeah.
but it can limit my ability to be generous.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. There's nothing like being loved on or being given to. So this buddy of ours in Michigan, he and his wife were relatively affluent. They're one of his families in the Midwest that like bought one house, raised all their 3 kids in that house, kept the house, like painted it, maintained it, but paid it off in 20 years and didn't buy any of their houses. And we're just really good with their money and made some good investments. They loved to give money away or cars away to single parents. It was so inspiring that their ability to save and make resource went directly to these mostly single moms. And you would see these moms who've got these busted up vans or broken down cars, driving in almost a brand new vehicle with new car seats. And there was a sense of safety now, and as a mama bear, my little kingdom is taken care of. And this couple, of which nobody would know where the cars came from, would just bask in it. You could see them bragging with each other, like, look at what we got to do, how we got to celebrate that. And I remember one time, Taryn and I, we were buying our first place together. We were in Michigan, and we didn't have 2 nickels rubbed together. We had this nasty old condo that nobody was going to buy, so I couldn't sell it. I was upside down on it. This couple took us out to Wendy's because they don't spend a lot of money on other things that don't matter, and took us out to Wendy's, and they said, we want to help you with the down payment of your house. And I was too proud to take it. I didn't realize that these people weren't just doing it for us. They were doing it for them. And part of being a recipient of people that are excessively generous is you begin to realize, wait a minute, I want to do that now in return. So Tara and I have this narrative, part of our, as we get older, we still do a little bit now, but we just don't have that much money. But as we get older, the hope is that we have more resources, that we can do those quiet things, and we will call out that couple's name and say, we want to do what so-and-so have done for us and other people, and still continue to do this day. Because there's something profound about having resources and being able to sort of take care of other people and be a recipient of other people's blessings. Sort of speaks towards that for us. But so well said. Thank you.
I'm Julie. I think what demotivates me can be fear, but also like analysis paralysis. Mm-hmm. Like there's all these good things, and how do you find the thing that's the most impactful? And I was just saying that the thing I think that has been a big motivator for me is my parents really modeled generosity as a way of life, like not just at Christmas, but all the time with your money and your time and your talent. And it makes me feel like I need to do that too, to try to be a good grown-up.
Yeah, from a parenting standpoint, thank you. Right, there could be worse things. Your kids could call you in the future as being generous would be amazing, one of them. So that's good. All right, thank you. Thank you, Watershed. Thank you guys for the way in which you respond to this community. When the ask is made and you guys give sacrificially, when you could have a nicer car or another vacation and you don't, when you could have a date night out at a nice restaurant and you don't, because there are organizations, there are people, and dare I say us here, who are recipients of your generosity. That when you buy a home, and you don't buy as much home as you could buy because you continue to keep set aside amount of resource that goes towards things that matter to you, and you get strategic about it, and you get intentional with it. Thank you for that. And may we become an evolved group of people, not who are cocky, they don't have it figured out, but in that space of growth, we begin to be more generous, and we begin to realize that we give from a different space of generosity than out of maybe obligation or guilt. But that we're armed and we're motivated, and that we're a tribe, a group of people that when it comes to being generous, this group gets it. This group understands it. And so thank you for what you do. Thank you for how you take so seriously this community and how you invest what's going on here and outside the walls of this space. Father, we give you back all that is really yours anyways. That the privilege with which we have resources is something to be held so loosely. And may it be something that continues to grow for us, that we continue to be conduits of generosity to other people, to other movements, to other causes, to other organizations. We thank you for what you're doing in our lives. And we thank you for the space that we sit this morning with gratitude. We love you, and in Christ's name, amen.